Alright guys, so if you're somebody who's been struggling with Skinwalker's Faction Wars, which is probably one of the most difficult Faction Wars, at least for me it was, and you just pulled Tony the Tiger, the Frosted Flakes man himself, aka Ragash, well I gotta say, I don't think Skinwalker's Faction Wars is going to be much of an issue at all. I mean, obviously you have to add 2 more champions to get 3 stars, but I just did it with 3 champions, and they're pretty low level gear. So let's jump into it and talk about this champion and see if he's worth you investing in or not. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So guys, today we're inside my test server account and we're going to be talking about Ragash, kind of a champion overview and champion guide if you either have this champion or are going to be going for this champion. So in that intro Faction Wars clip, I want to show you all the gear these champions are wearing. Fane, very low gear, I'd say. We have Steel Skull, also relatively low gear as well, fairly fast, but definitely not unachievable stats in my opinion if you're somebody who's going for Faction Wars completion, right? Now, Ragash is currently in a Relentless set. I'm going to get into his gearing and kind of what I would do as far as his gearing goes in just a few seconds, but I wanted to show you guys the gear of these 3 champions before we got into that. So obviously, if you want to do stage 21 of Faction Wars or any stage and 3-star it, you will need to bring in 5 champions. But the point of that intro and the point of me having ran Faction Wars stage 21 was just to real quickly give you guys an example of how well Ragash does. So obviously throw 2 more champions in, no problem. But the reason why he is so good here is because of this A2 ability that he's about to do. So just 1 second, we'll see him do it. His A2 ability, when he does it, it places a stun. Now, it doesn't do stuns if it weak hits. It does place the decreased defense, even if it weak hits, no problem whatsoever, because the decreased defense is placed before he ever even hits. So it's absolutely amazing, very, very good. You do need to build him with accuracy though, but the stun is going to lock these waves down very, very well. Obviously, Lua skipped her turn because she did place the stun. He weak hit it, I guess, on 2 champions, 3 champions. So all the Magic Affinity champions, he weak hit it on, or weak hit on. I don't know if that's actually hitted. Is that a word? I don't think so. We're not going to say that again. But we're going to back out of this, guys. So let's go look at the champion and talk about the pros and kind of the cons to him, if there are even very many cons, to be honest. So we're going to sort by recently used. Go over to skills. His A1 ability, this does activate if you use an ally attack. Probably does if you do counterattack. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't actually tested that. But attacks one enemy 2 times, places a 60% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns, which is very good, especially if you're running him with a champion who doesn't give increased defense buff AoE, because he's a defense-based champion. You obviously want him to have as much defense as he can get, so this obviously works out very, very well. Now, as far as the books go, this ability doesn't need to be booked. Definitely the other 2, I would go ahead and book them, but it's A1, you don't really need to do it. So if you get lucky, land it on Fur Typhoon and Fleetness? What? Felid Fleetness? That is a tongue twister if I've ever seen one. Felid Fleetness. I can't say that word. All right, so if you land it on these 2 abilities, guys, you're going to be good to go. But this A1, you don't really need the books. So as A2, attacks all enemies, 75% chance, books up to 100% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense on all enemies for 2 turns. So this is before attacking, which means no weak hits. It can only be resisted, and as long as you have more accuracy than the enemy has resistance, you should be pretty good. Also, 75% chance of placing stun debuff for 1 turn after attacking. Now, this can have a weak hit because it's after attacking. It books up to 100%, and that makes Ragash one of the few champions who actually has a 100% stun AoE. Granted, it's for 1 turn, of course, but that is an absolutely amazing debuff and allows him to be incredible for wave control and dragon, any progressional content. Very good for Faction Wars. And like I said, Skinwalkers, at least for me, was one of the more difficult factions to complete to get Lydia. And then his A3 ability places a 25% strengthen, absolutely amazing buff, 30% increased speed, once again, an amazing buff on all allies for 2 turns. Also places perfect veil buff on this champion for 2 turns as well. This is on a 4-turn cooldown when fully booked. Definitely go ahead and book these 2 abilities. You're going to want them booked if you're going to use them very regularly. Now his passive, at the start of each turn, places a perfect veil buff for 1 turn on the ally with the highest attack. Now this actually worked out very well because when I was doing the Faction War example, Fane is a known very squishy champion. Well, she had the highest attack, so he was constantly placing that perfect veil on Fane, keeping her hidden and basically making Steel Skull the tank the entire time. And Steel Skull can obviously take much more damage than Fane. The biggest issue with Fane is she is so extremely squishy, 13,000 HP and 727 defense. So that perfect veil was absolutely incredible to have on her. And then, just to top it all off, he has an increased ally defense in all battles by 30%. Absolutely amazing. So his kit works out very good. Hopefully you guys are seeing some synergies from there. And then his Masteries. So this Masteries setup, I'm going to hide my webcam so you guys can see this. This Mastery setup is not the one you have to go. Of course, you can definitely go defense for a little more defense throughout the thing, whatever you want. But this is the one that I'm liking, especially for like PvE type progression, because mostly you have this ability right here. Lasting Gifts is the reason why I went in the support tree and picked this up. I will rebuild him towards the end of this video. We'll put some real heavy nuke damage gear on him, or the best I have, and see what kind of damage he can be pushed to. But for now, this is more of like the sustainability, doing good damage. As far as this down here, you could go Helm Smasher, War Master, or Flawless Execution. Really whatever you want. With my current build, I should probably have Flawless Execution, but it doesn't really matter. So these are the setups that I have. Lasting Gifts is obviously very, very good because of his A2 ability or A3 ability, placing all these buffs. Having those buffs extended is so valuable. So guys, this is the Mastery setup I have, kind of a guideline for you guys to go off of. Obviously, make the Mastery setup for what you need most inside or with your Ragash. So let me turn the webcam back on real quick, and we will go to his current gearing. So when you're going to be building him for PvE content, so if you're not going to be strictly using him for PvP, you will want to build him with accuracy. Most areas, as far as like progressional stuff, 200, 300 accuracy, you should be perfectly fine. So 291, I don't need that much for Faction Wars. 200, you're going to be perfectly fine. No issues whatsoever. Now, as far as with PvP content, I don't know if I would stack very much accuracy on him, just because most champions in the arena, if they're going to be running very much resistance, it's probably going to be upwards of 200-300, and you're going to have to build for quite a bit of accuracy to actually place your debuffs on those champions, and that just takes away from your damage. If you're bringing Ragash in as a damage dealer, for me personally, I'm going to focus on getting him to do damage, have another champion like Madame Saris place decreased defense, not going to be an issue whatsoever. Now, I might be interested in putting him up to like maybe 100, maybe even 200 accuracy if I was able to get that, simply because of the stun, but to be honest, I'm going to much more prioritize damage for PvP, way over accuracy, at least for my build for Ragash, if I decide to use him in PvP content. But for me, as a pretty late game player, I have Solus. I'm probably just going to be using Ragash in Faction Wars, to be 100% honest. But as far as his gearing goes, I have him in Relentless Gear because of that stun. Absolutely amazing for Faction Wars. His entire kit has a lot of benefit of him taking more turns. If he can get back around, keep the enemy stunned the entire time, it's going to be incredible. So I have him at decent HP. I haven't built for any HP specifically, but his base HP is pretty decent. So we have 31,000 HP. We have 3,200 defense. Definitely not anything crazy. Obviously, you want to stack the defense because he is a defense-based champion. The speed, 200 plus, is going to be very good. Crit rate, 100% crit rate, unless you're going against specifically Force Affinity champions. Then you can go to 85, but honestly, just get him to 100% crit rate and then stack your crit damage. He's at 155% crit damage. I've tried to make the gearing kind of relatable, so hopefully this 155% crit damage will make me not get roasted in the comments. Oh, I can't reach those stats. But the speed, good crit damage, good defense, make him survivable, give him some accuracy, PvE content, no problem whatsoever. He's going to keep the waves locked down. He's going to do some sick damage. So let's jump in here real quick, give you guys an example of what he did in Faction Wars and how smooth it looked. And then what I want to do is throw him in the arena. We're going to stack him with some really good gear. And then I actually, before this video, I did some screenshots of Solus doing damage against the same teams as Ragash did, so you guys can kind of compare those damage versus actually doing that in this video. What I did for those two champions, well, right here you can see stun. Everybody's locked down. It is so nice. I mean, you can't die if the enemies can't hit you, right? But what I've done with Ragash and Solus is I took the exact same gear, took all the accessories off, took all of their masteries off, except for the crit rate and crit damage one. Everything else was off, and I compared the two champions. The reason why I compare my champions like that versus any other way is because if you have two champions with different base stats and you equalize their gear so they have equal finish or end stats, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because champions with higher base stats are always going to have higher end stats if you're really trying to maximize their gear. So what I've done, like I said, is I made their gear the exact same. So I'll show you guys how that actually looks in just a second. And that run that I showed at the beginning of this video, the Faction War run, was fairly long. It was like 4 or 5 minutes. It's not terrible, I guess, if you're going for a 3-star, but it's not going to be 3-star, obviously, because you need to bring 5 champions for the Faction War. But the point of it is that Ragash allows you to get through these waves without much of a threat, to be honest, because he's stunning everybody. On this part right here, maybe a little bit of an issue. Obviously, bring a team that actually makes sense and build your champions to actually make sense. But I just did it with the 3 champions, and it really wasn't much of an issue whatsoever. Once he starts getting the stun off on these enemies here, it's going to be perfectly fine. These 2 side people are going to die. It's going to be no issue. But since we're actually dying here, I'm going to go ahead and back out. We're not going to show that. Earlier, it worked no problem. So, guys, let me show you all real quick the stat comparison that I was talking about. So, right here, we have Ragash's stats and the exact same gear that Solus had. Let me see if I have my Solus actually equipped with that gear real quick. I didn't want to make this video super long. I don't think he's equipped with it, though. No, he's not. So he's naked right now, 100% naked. He has 2 masteries, like I said. And then Ragash is in a different set of gear. But these are the champions comparisons. So we have Ragash here, and then I'll open up Solus maybe. Maybe it'll open up. There we go. Perfect. So just for a little comparison's sake, we'll zoom in on these stats on the far right so you guys can hopefully see all these. So Ragash is on the left, and Solus is on the right. So you can see Ragash is going to have less HP than Solus. He's going to have a little bit more defense because his base defense is higher. Now, as far as the Faction Guardians go, it's very similar. Okay, we do have Faction Guardians from Solus. I should have taken that off. Not a huge deal, but he is getting an extra 2,000 HP. So not a huge difference between their HPs. The defense, just a slight boost for Ragash. And then the speed is actually a decent amount higher. And you got to remember, this is fairly low, no speed sets. So maybe down the road, obviously Ragash is going to be easier to gear for more speed. Everything else is pretty similar, but you can see obviously where the differences are. Ragash is going to have more defense if they have the exact same gear, more speed, maybe a little bit less HP. So that's a little bit of a comparison there. And then what I did with this exact gear, so you can see they have the exact same sets there in that background, is I went into different areas and I tested them out. So let's go ahead and move on to the damage showcase of this champion. If you're somebody who's mid to late game, this is where it's going to be important for you. If you're early game, actually this is more late game stuff. If you're early and mid game, everything I just shown should be what's interesting to you. Finishing faction wars, being able to control the waves in basically any dungeon. Like you literally throw him in a dungeon where he's strong or neutral affinity, he's going to stun him. You can see here, he's going to stun him, keep him locked down, and then all you have to do is just do damage to him. Get to the boss, have somebody kill the boss, and you're going to be good to go. So here we got Ragash doing 67,000 damage with an absolute potato of a photo. So bad of a screenshot, but that's not really important. We have 69,000 damage over here. This is all on Dragon Stage 23, which is Void Affinity, because obviously Ragash is Spirit, so we could be having weak hits against magic. I wanted to keep it fair there. We have 69,000 damage, 67, 70, and then let's go to Solus's for comparison. Once again, on Dragon Stage 23, zoom in on Solus's, and 81 versus 69, 67, 66 there, which is kind of odd considering there's such a big difference between the far right ads. This guy right here, 65, Solus did 71. We have a 75 back there. So obviously Solus is hitting harder on Dragon. Next, let's show the 2 arena matches that I did. So this one is going to be against Ivy Lee's team in our current test server build, and this is Solus against the exact same team. So I'll show you guys that team real quick before we move on. So this is the team right here, Ivy Lee's team, and then we will, let's see how the damage broken down between these two. So we have Ragash over here on the left, and we have Solus over here on the right. So let me hide my webcam so you guys once again can see this. This is more important than my mic moving around. All right, so we have over here on the left, we have 62,000, 83,000. Solus hitting significantly harder, 87,000, 73,000. 80,000 on Godseeker and a reaction proc on Godseeker here. So obviously, just between these 2 middle champions, which were, I believe, this chick, Hope, and Abess, I believe is what it was in the middle. Obviously, Solus is hitting quite a bit harder than Ragash there as well. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which I believe was Layla's team. The Shadowkin team we have set up. Let's see, Ragash, Layla, and then Solus should be the exact same team setup. So here we go again. Now, this one was kind of odd. Obviously, I couldn't get that number right there to show up. Unfortunately, it was just hidden behind the resisted, but 70,000 on a Genbo. So let me show you guys the team that we were fighting there real quick, and then we'll jump into some arena matches and just kind of showcase them. Actually, I can't really do very many arena matches because I'm stuck in only seeing 3 people. But Layla's team, we had a Genbo, Kyoku, Rio, and Lady Kimmy. Obviously, some Magic Affinity champions, weak affinity for Ragash to be attacking. But as far as the damage dealt goes, we have Ragash doing 39,000 to, I believe that was Lady Kimmy. It looks like Solus did 50,000, somewhere around there. 63,000 to Kyoku. I can't see what that is on Kyoku over there, unfortunately. 70,000 from Ragash on Genbo, which was significantly higher than Solus's. I'm thinking that Genbo may have died before the increased defense went on him on the Ragash hit, maybe. I don't know exactly what happened there, but that is quite quite a significant difference. 44,000 from Ragash over here on the far right against Rio, and then 52,000 from Solus. So as far as comparing these two champions, Solus versus Ragash, Solus is going to win out, okay? He's a defense-based nuker as well. He's a void affinity. He can go against anybody, hits like an absolute truck. Very, very, very good champion. I use it with my Siphi all the time. However, I understand that not everybody has a Solus to use. So therefore, if you're looking for a defense-based nuker, maybe you had a Siphi, maybe you have a Doomscreech, maybe you have some champion to give you increased defense, this guy is going to hit probably harder than Tatura. Actually, we can compare that real quick. Go over here to the Hell Hades website. Ragash right here with his A2 ability, 4.3 multiplier there. We have his base defense is going to be 1443. We have Tatura base defense of 1432. So Ragash is a little bit higher base defense, so he's going to be able to have more defense overall. And then Tatura multiplier is a 4.2. So obviously Ragash has a higher multiplier than Tatura. So if you previously were using Tatura as your nuker, for comparison, Solus has a 4.9, I do believe. So obviously, pretty significant difference. Also, Ragash has the passive that gives him more damage dealt against targets whose defense is lower than this champion's defense. So obviously, if before you were using Tatura as your defense-based nuker, and I've seen it happen quite a bit, then Ragash is going to be a pretty easy substitute for you to go ahead and throw in and use, probably with some pretty good success. So let me jump in here real quick. I'm going to re-gear my Ragash for a little bit harder hitting damage dealing gear, and we'll jump around and play around with him in some other areas, guys. So I'll be right back. All right, guys, so I now have Ragash built as an actual damage dealer. So we have pretty good speed for my Kymar. He's going to be putting the enemies to sleep, and then Ragash is going to get his turn. So speed isn't super important. We actually have decent accuracy, so maybe he can place the stun sometimes. Okay, crit damage. He's definitely not going to be top of the line geared, but 5,500 defense, definitely not too bad. Let me go over here, and do I want to redo the Masteries? I kind of do. Not going to be a huge difference, but if I take the crit rate one, I think I actually want to take Ruthless Ambush because we're going to get a little bit of extra damage, as well as Opportunist because I do use Kymar, and if the enemies are still asleep, yeah, if they're still asleep, then it's going to do a little bit of extra damage. So over here, as far as the support, nothing really that I really need, to be honest. Lore of Steel, maybe if I had a defense set on, we'll just take some extra defense. Doesn't really matter. We'll be able to do some counterattacks as well. We should be going first. I'm not going to be using him in a go second team yet. Maybe down the road, I do build a go second team for him. But right now, let's go ahead and give this a shot. So we have not very many options whatsoever. So let's go ahead and see what we got going on here. So let's go ahead and jump in here, see what Ragash hits for. Earlier, he was hitting for, I don't remember exactly, relatively low. He wasn't one-shotting everybody, basically. So we have the decreased defense on the Genbo. Rio's going to cleanse because the Madam is too fast, unfortunately. That's what happens when your champions get to be too quick. Let's go ahead and hit with this A2 ability. They have no debuffs whatsoever on them. Let's go ahead and hit. Boom. That actually hit pretty good, to be honest. Like, no decreased defense. He couldn't even place the decreased defense because they had block debuffs on him. And he still one-shot the Rio as well as the Genbo. It actually did some pretty significant damage to Tyrauku as well, which I have to say that's actually pretty impressive. 98, 104? Dang. Okay, so while he's not to the level of Solus, if you have some pretty good nuking gear, he's definitely not a bad option. Using him as a go second champion. Now, the issue with using him on like defense or as a go second champion, obviously if you're using him on offense, you can be smart and make decisions and pick the right teams. Let's go ahead and use his A2 here, see what it hits for. 131, 122, so okay, he's smacking. He's definitely smacking pretty hard. But the issue of using him on defense is that most damage dealers are going to be magic affinity, or a big portion of them, right? So your Trunda, your Hefrak now, they're going to be magic affinity. So they're going to be strong affinity versus Ragash, which is going to lend him to being pretty squishy against those champions, obviously. So something to keep in mind if you're using him on a defense team, but he is a defense-based champion. So he is going to survive those hits a little bit better. Let's go ahead and try this one more time, see what he hits for. Should one-shot everybody, okay? Got a reaction proc over there from Cardinal. Not a huge deal because he's actually got some pretty fast speeds, okay? So he's counterattacking now. See if they can take him down. See if he can just one-man the team. Okay, well, there we go. Deleted. Absolutely deleted. So obviously the Cardinal and Stoneskin messed up the team for sure. So unfortunately, these are the only people I can see. But we can go over here to the Doom Tower and see on a higher floor what kind of damage he can do. Obviously, this dude, I'd say, can definitely be viable as a nuker. Now, if you have Solus, you're probably not going to need this guy. If you have a Siphi, if you have a Doomscreech, if you have a champion who makes sense with the increased defense, if you don't have an increased defense buff, you may not even want to use this guy, to be honest. Let's see. Let's get an example of what kind of damage he can do with or without the increased defense. So better example is going to be in Dragon Stage 23. Don't have to worry about bad affinities. So obviously, if you're going against magic affinity like a Trunda, you may want to reconsider bringing him, because if you don't one-shot her, she's probably going to one-shot your team because Trunda's a little bit crazy. So we'll use Siphi and no decreased defense on the enemy. We'll use Siphi here, and we're going to go ahead and use the increased defense. See what he hits for like this. He places the decreased defense, 109, 104, 90,000. So definitely some pretty solid hits. Now, if we do the exact same thing and we don't use the increased defense, let's see what he's hitting for. So we're hitting for 80, 60, 60. So obviously you're losing like 30,000 damage just on this hit. So that's a pretty significant chunk of damage. That's like 50% damage difference, right? Somewhere around there. But that's a pretty significant drop in damage if you don't have an increased defense champion. So not having an increased defense with him, obviously going to be an issue. But if you can get him to counterattack or get him to activate his increased defense, could make sense. Running without an increased defense champion, just something to consider, something to keep in mind. What I was talking about earlier with the whole increased defense thing is basically if I threw in my Cardiel plus Ragash, this is probably not the best stage to do it on. We need a stage with actually like some enemies more than just two. So Ragash plus Cardiel. So basically what you're going to see here is Cardiel do his ally attack ability, and then Ragash proc his increased defense. So we'll just do the buff from there, and then we will do this ally attack, and then Ragash should activate that ability when he uses A1 with the ally attack. He didn't even attack, and he still got the buff. So that's actually very, very nice. But guys, that is my overview and opinions on Ragash. If you get him, I think he's definitely a champion worth investing in. Tomorrow, there is actually a guaranteed event for Ragash. So if you're pulling during the event, I think he's going to be worth it for a lot of players. Now, I definitely don't think, like if you're a late game player, if you have Solus, if you don't really need a defense-based nuker or something like that, he's probably not going to be an account-changing champion for you, to be 100% honest. Faction Wars, if your Faction War team is pretty safe, he's going to not really be played there. But for me, I have, I think, decent amount of Skinwalker legendaries. I have Leoris, I have Brachus, I have Cleopteryx, obviously. All those champions, I think I'm probably going to put him in my Faction War team as well. Because like a team like this with Leo, I don't know if my Leo's actually even geared. He's not geared right now on the test server. But a team like this is going to get through it pretty quickly. So I really think bringing Ragash for my team makes a lot of sense. Because before, Leo would just get killed. But now I can throw Ragash in there. I'm not going to gear him for a damage dealer necessarily. I'll probably gear him with some like typical gear sets, something to be Faction War specific. He'll speed my Faction War team up pretty well. Maybe down the road I want to use him as a defense-based nuker, but for now I have Solus. Solus is my defense-based nuker. I don't see Ragash outdoing him. I do think Ragash for me would be worth it for the Faction Wars. But guys, with that said, thank you all very much for watching. I know we had a bit longer video, but I wanted to kind of go more in depth on this champion. So hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you all in the next one.